I'm suggesting actually that vision involves an outward projection of images. What you're seeing is in your mind, but not inside your head. Our minds are extended beyond our brains in the simplest act of perception.
8.5 million people have already watched the lecture that TED removed from its official platform. Rupert Sheldrake stepped onto that stage in 2013 and showed data that destroys the foundation of modern physics. Measurements proving that the speed of light dropped by 20 kilometers per second until physicists falsified the data in 1972, redefining the meter to hide the variations. Experiments confirming that you can detect when someone is watching you from behind because your consciousness physically extends beyond your brain. Data showing that when you learn something new, it makes it easier for others to learn it later because we're connected through fields that science refuses to investigate. TED didn't just remove the video. They set up a tribunal with anonymous accusers that Sheldrake could never confront. Why? Because he didn't present theories. He presented replicable measurements proving that the universe has memory and that matter is conscious and that you are not an isolated machine. They always knew. Now you know. But what comes next will show you the consequences of this.
In January 2013, at TEDx Whitechapel in London, a biologist from Cambridge with impeccable credentials steps onto the circular red stage. Rupert Sheldrake had everything that academia values: a PhD in biochemistry, experience as a Royal Society researcher, and more than 80 scientific papers published in respected journals. The event's theme promised provocation, challenging existing paradigms. 18 minutes later, he had committed the ultimate sacrilege of the 21st century by questioning the fundamental dogmas of scientific materialism. What happened next reveals more about the current state of science than any experiment could demonstrate. Two militant atheist bloggers in the United States, Jerry Coyne and P.Z. Myers, denounced Sheldrake and attacked TED for giving his lecture a platform. The response was immediate and draconian, as the TED administrators removed the lecture from their official YouTube channel, relegated it to an obscure corner of their website, and stamped it with a warning label. Stop for a moment and absorb this extraordinary irony. An organization whose slogan is "Ideas Worth Spreading" decided that some ideas need to be suppressed. When it was removed, the video had a modest 35,000 views, but since then, its copies have been watched 8.5 million times and translated into 28 languages. The attempt at censorship transformed an academic lecture into a viral bomb that exposed exactly what Sheldrake was denouncing: the transformation of science into untouchable orthodoxy. But what exactly did he say that provoked such a visceral reaction? Sheldrake committed the sin of naming the elephants in the room. He listed 10 assumptions that modern science treats as absolute truths, but which have never been empirically proven. They are axioms of faith, not scientific conclusions. Among them are premises like nature is mechanical, matter is unconscious, the laws of nature are fixed, the total amount of matter and energy is always the same, nature has no purpose, and memories are stored materially in the brain. Do you notice the devastating pattern? Each of these dogmas closes a door of investigation. If nature is mechanical by definition, investigating consciousness in plants becomes heresy. If memories only exist in brain synapses, morphogenetic fields are impossible a priori. If physical constants cannot vary, measuring their fluctuations constitutes a waste of time. TED itself admitted that Sheldrake was specifically invited to an event about challenging existing paradigms. The problem arose when he actually challenged the fundamental paradigm, the one that governs not just science, but determines what can or cannot be investigated, published, funded, or considered respectable. The official accusation revealed the nature of the problem when TED's scientific consultants questioned whether his list was a fair description of scientific assumptions and believed there was little evidence for some of Sheldrake's more radical claims. Translating from bureaucratese, he dared to suggest that the central dogmas of materialism might be wrong. Note that they didn't refute his allegations with contrary evidence. They simply declared that questioning these axioms crosses the line into the pseudoscientific. Sheldrake holds a doctorate in biochemistry from Cambridge, was a Fellow of the Royal Society, and directed studies in cell biology at Clare College. His credentials are irreproachable, his experiments follow rigorous protocols, and his results are replicable. But none of this matters when you commit blasphemy against the materialist religion that has captured modern science. The scientific community reacted exactly as the Church reacted to Galileo, not with refutatory experiments, but with institutional excommunication. The difference is that today, we don't burn heretics in public squares. We burn their reputations in anonymous committees. Sheldrake and Graham Hancock faced anonymous accusations from a body whose authority TED trusts, under whose advice they act and behind which they shelter, but whose names they never revealed. Think deeply about this. Anonymous accusers, judgment without the right to confront the denouncers, and sentencing based on violation of orthodoxy and not of scientific method. You are witnessing the Inquisition of the 21st century, dressed in white lab coats instead of black cassocks. What was born as a revolutionary method of investigation, one that promised to follow evidence regardless of where it led, to question all authority and test every hypothesis, has metamorphosed into its dialectical opposite. Modern science maintains the tools, but has lost the revolutionary spirit. It's like preserving the corpse of a revolutionary and worshipping it as a saint, where the form remains, but the transformative essence has completely evaporated. When someone proudly declares that they don't believe in God but believe in science, they're inadvertently confessing a transfer of faith, not a liberation from it. They've replaced the cathedral altar with the laboratory, but kept intact the fundamental psychological need for unquestionable dogmas. Modern heretics don't deny the virginity of Mary, they question the unconsciousness of matter. The sin has changed its address, but the punishment remains equally severe through professional ostracism, career destruction, and permanent intellectual exile. Modern cosmology operates on a contradiction so fundamental that its very existence depends on keeping it carefully unexamined. Before the 1960s, the universe seemed eternal and static, governed by immutable mathematical rules inscribed in the very fabric of reality. Then came the discovery that shook all foundations. The universe has a definite temporal origin, it constantly evolves, and it complexifies at every instant. 14 billion years of uninterrupted transformation, unprecedented structures continually emerging, and increasing complexity at scales that defy human imagination. Here arises the paradox that no one in conventional science wants to face directly. If the cosmos itself evolves radically through time, why would the rules that govern all this evolution remain singularly immune to change? Galaxies form and collide in cosmic dances, lasting billions of years. Stars are born from gas clouds and die in explosions that illuminate the entire universe. Heavy elements are forged in stellar furnaces that didn't exist in the beginning. Planets condense from protoplanetary disks through processes that take millions of years. It's like claiming that the script of a play constantly rewrites itself while the grammatical rules that structure the text remain frozen since the first word. Terence McKenna captured this incongruity with devastating precision when he said that modern science is based on the principle of granting one free miracle to explain everything else. And what a colossal miracle we're asked to accept without question. All the matter in the universe, all the energy that moves galaxies and lights stars, space-time itself in which everything exists. And here's the most revealing detail: the physical laws that supposedly govern all of it, arising instantly from absolute nothingness, from a complete void without any explanation, without any identifiable prior cause, without any comprehensible generating mechanism, without any possible explanation within the very framework that materialism has built. Notice the extraordinary magnitude of this intellectual demand. Scientific materialism built its entire reputation on the adamantine principle of conservation. Matter doesn't spontaneously arise from the void. Energy doesn't disappear without leaving traces. Every transformation has an identifiable cause and an explainable mechanism, except one, the one on which everything depends, the origin of absolutely everything. For this singular founding event, all rules are cheerfully suspended. We're asked for a cosmic free pass, a unique and miraculously convenient exception that violates precisely the fundamental principles that physics declares sacred in all other contexts. The mathematical equations that describe the Big Bang literally break and disintegrate at moment zero. The mathematics collapses into a singularity. Physics surrenders to the incomprehensible. The formulas produce meaningless infinities. What do cosmologists do in the face of this epistemological abyss? They call it a singularity, a sophisticated technical term that sounds impressive, but simply means we haven't the slightest idea what happened. It's an epistemological black hole sucking into itself all fundamental questions about the origin and nature of reality, an explanatory vacuum at the very heart of modern cosmology. But the conceptual absurdity deepens even further when we examine the implications. Not only would matter and energy have arisen instantly from nothing, the very physical laws that govern their interaction emerged complete, perfect, and calibrated with infinitesimal precision. Gravitation with exactly the force necessary to allow galaxy formation without immediate collapse. Electromagnetism is perfectly balanced to enable stable chemical bonds. Nuclear forces adjusted with precision of trillionths to allow the existence of complex atoms. Fundamental constants tuned as if a cosmic conductor had tuned every instrument in the universal orchestra before the first chord. A fine-tuning so absurdly improbable that mathematicians calculate its probability as effectively zero without some form of design or purpose. The orthodox response to this statistical enigma. The anthropic principle is a tautology dressed as a profound explanation. We exist to observe the universe because the constants allowed our existence. Therefore, the constants must be as they are because otherwise we wouldn't be here to observe them. Pure logical circularity masquerading as cosmological insight, a rhetorical trick that explains absolutely nothing but allows materialists to sleep peacefully, pretending they've solved the problem. Examine carefully the underlying linguistic metaphor that structures all cosmological thought. Laws of nature. Have you ever stopped to deeply question this specific vocabulary choice? Laws are exclusive creations of complex societies, deliberate products of organized consciousness, and sophisticated instruments of social coordination. Only advanced civilizations with elaborate political structures produce legal codes. By calling natural regularities laws, we inadvertently import an entire anthropocentric and teleological framework. We project conscious human structures onto the cosmos, then pretend to be astonished when the universe seems strangely suited to produce human consciousness. In a genuinely evolutionary universe, where everything continuously transforms through billions of years, would the fundamental rules of the game remain singularly frozen since the first nanosecond of existence? Galaxies develop increasingly complex spiral structures. First-generation stars differ radically from subsequent generations. Heavy elements only exist because earlier stellar furnaces synthesize them. Life emerges from the inorganic and diversifies into forms impossible to predict. Consciousness awakens from matter and begins to contemplate its own origin. Every level of cosmic organization demonstrates evolution, except precisely the one that supposedly governs all the others. Seriously consider the revolutionary alternative that Sheldrake proposes: cosmic habits instead of eternal Platonic laws. The universe learns through experience. It develops tendencies through repetition. It reinforces successful patterns through morphic resonance. The regularity we observe emerges not from pre-existing legislation imposed from outside, but from habits consolidated through billions of cosmic iterations. Gravity works consistently, not because an eternal and immutable law determines it must be so, but because matter has learned to behave gravitationally through countless interactions that have reinforced this specific pattern of mutual attraction. This elegantly solves the fine-tuning paradox without invoking miracles or multiverses. Instead of constants miraculously calibrated from the first instant by an omniscient cosmic legislator, we have parameters that evolved organically. They adjusted dynamically. They found stable configurations through iterative processes of trial and refinement. The universe wasn't born with a complete instruction manual written in mathematical language, but developed its own operational tendencies through the accumulated experience of billions of years of cosmic experimentation. There's something that every pharmaceutical laboratory in the world knows, but prefers not to discuss publicly. When they synthesize a completely new substance, a molecule that has never existed before in the history of the universe, the initial crystallization process is extraordinarily difficult. Chemists can spend months trying to make the substance crystallize for the first time. Perfect temperature, exact pressure, specific solvents, and yet the crystals resist forming, as if nature itself doesn't yet know what structure to assume. But then something inexplicable happens. The second time they try to crystallize the same substance, even in another laboratory on another continent, without any communication between the teams, the crystals form more easily. The third synthesis, faster still. After a few dozen crystallizations around the world, what used to take months now happens in days, sometimes hours. The substance has learned to crystallize. Do you know what the official explanation the chemical industry offers for this phenomenon documented for decades? Contamination. They claim that microscopic particles of the crystallized substance travel between laboratories. How? In the beard of visiting scientists, in the clothes of researchers who go to conferences, in atmospheric dust that circles the globe. Any explanation, no matter how absurd, rather than admit the disturbing possibility, nature has memory, and this memory isn't confined to brains or databases. It permeates the very structure of reality. Rupert Sheldrake had the audacity to name and investigate this phenomenon. Morphic resonance, he called it. The idea that each time something happens in nature, it becomes more likely to happen again, not by statistical coincidence, not by physical contamination, but because the universe develops habits through repetition, it builds tendencies through accumulated experience. Think deeply about this fundamental question. When an elephant embryo begins its development from a single microscopic cell, what exactly determines that it will transform into an elephant and not a whale or a tree? The automatic answer is DNA. But here's the problem that biology prefers not to emphasize. DNA only encodes proteins. They're instructions for manufacturing the molecular bricks, not the architectural blueprint of the building. The same basic proteins that form your eye also build an oak leaf. What determines the final form? Sheldrake proposes something simultaneously revolutionary and intuitively obvious. The developing embryo accesses the collective memory accumulated from all the elephants that have ever existed. It tunes into an information field that contains the elephant pattern, refined and strengthened through millions of years of repetition. It's not just genes being transmitted from generation to generation. It's the very form, the three-dimensional organizational pattern, the morphological wisdom of how to build an elephant. Have you ever wondered why ancient rituals maintain inexplicable power through the millennia? Why do places considered sacred by ancient cultures continue to provoke profound experiences in skeptical modern visitors? Why do specific meditative practices, repeated in the same postures for thousands of years, produce consistent states of consciousness among practitioners who have never met? The official answer from materialism is always the same: psychological suggestion, placebo effect, statistical coincidence. But there's another possibility that orthodox science absolutely refuses to investigate. Each time a ritual is performed, it strengthens a specific morphogenetic field. Each meditation in the same location adds invisible but real layers to the space. Each repeated mantra makes the next one more effective, not through primitive superstition, but through cumulative resonance over time. In the 1920s, psychologists at Harvard conducted experiments that should have revolutionized our understanding of knowledge transmission. Rats were trained to escape from a specific water maze, choosing the illuminated exit to avoid electric shock. Normal so far. But then the inexplicable began. Rats in Edinburgh, Scotland, with no genetic connection to the American rats, no recent common ancestors, began solving the same type of maze progressively faster. First generation, normal time. 10th generation, significantly faster. 20th generation, they were born practically knowing the solution. How did specific information about a maze at Harvard reach rats in Scotland? Genetics doesn't explain it because there was no crossbreeding between the populations. There were no rats traveling across the Atlantic carrying modified genes. Conventional evolutionary theory is completely silent in the face of this data. But through morphic resonance, the phenomenon makes crystal clear sense. The Harvard rats, through repeated learning, created a morphogenetic field of knowledge. The Edinburgh rats, facing the same challenge, accessed this field. The information traveled through channels that completely transcend physical space. And here's the part that should make you question everything. This is happening right now, at this very moment, with the human species. Every skill we develop collectively becomes progressively more accessible for the next to learn. Children today learn to use smartphones intuitively, not just because of user-friendly design, but because the human morphogenetic field has already incorporated these patterns. Languages become easier to learn the more people master them. Mathematical concepts that took centuries to be understood are now accessible to teenage students. Why was this discovery attacked with such violence? Why was Sheldrake banned, censored, and transformed into a scientific pariah? Accepting morphic resonance means admitting that consciousness isn't imprisoned in individual skulls and recognizing that information can travel through non-physical pathways. It means that telepathy, presentiment, and intuitive knowledge, all the phenomena that materialism declares impossible, may have a real scientific basis, and this completely destroys the worldview that sustains the power of current scientific institutions. Conventional science prefers to invoke statistically impossible coincidences rather than admit obvious connections. It multiplies increasingly convoluted explanations to avoid the elegant solution. Why? Because the moment we accept that memory transcends the individual brain, that information propagates through non-material fields, that we're all connected through an invisible informational matrix, the entire edifice of reductionist materialism collapses spectacularly. Every growing plant is downloading billions of years of accumulated vegetal wisdom. Every migrating bird navigates routes engraved in the collective field of its species. every child babbling their first words is accessing linguistic patterns from the human morphogenetic field. Nature doesn't waste energy reinventing solutions. It remembers, learns, and evolves not just through random genetic mutations, but through informative fields that connect all beings across space and time. There's a conversation that Rupert Sheldrake had with the head of metrology at the British National Physical Laboratory that should have shaken the foundations of modern physics. When Sheldrake presented historical data showing systematic variations in the fundamental constants of the universe, the senior scientist made an extraordinary confession. "You've discovered," he said, "the most embarrassing episode in the history of our science." What Sheldrake had discovered was so disturbing that the scientific community preferred to literally redefine reality rather than face it. Between 1928 and 1945, something impossible happened to the speed of light. In every laboratory in the world, with increasingly precise equipment, scientists consistently measured the same thing. Light was getting slower. We're not talking about random fluctuations or measurement errors. The speed of light declined by 20 kilometers per second, globally, with precision to multiple decimal places. Laboratories in Berlin obtained the same results as laboratories in Washington. Japanese physicists confirmed British measurements. It was as if the entire universe was synchronized in a deceleration that physics declared impossible. Then, in 1945, as mysteriously as it began, the speed returned to its previous value, as if someone had adjusted a cosmic knob back to its original position. Do you know how the scientific community explained this phenomenon, documented in hundreds of scientific publications from that era? Intellectual phase locking. Let those words penetrate your mind. Intellectual phase locking. The official claim is that all the scientists in the world, independently, using different methodologies, distinct equipment, in completely diverse political and cultural contexts, somehow subconsciously adjusted their measurements to match collective expectations. For 17 years, with decimal precision. Globally, this isn't science, it's institutional desperation to maintain a narrative. The solution they implemented in 1972 reveals the depth of the epistemic panic. They did something that defies all scientific logic. They fixed the speed of light by definition, not by measurement, by decree. Then they redefined the meter using the speed of light itself as a reference. It's genius in its corrupt circularity. If the speed of light varies, the meter now varies with it, making any fluctuation undetectable by definition. It's like measuring the height of a mountain using a ruler that shrinks and expands along with the mountain. You'll always get the same number, regardless of what happens in reality. But the speed of light is just the tip of the iceberg of this metrological fraud. The gravitational constant, that supposedly immutable number that determines the force of gravity throughout the universe, fluctuates by more than 1.3% between measurements. This might seem small, but for a fundamental universal constant, it's like discovering that the value of pi changes depending on the day of the week. Different laboratories get consistently different values. Even more disturbing, the same laboratory using the same equipment gets different values at different times. Is there a pattern in these variations? Sheldrake discovered that yes, there is. The gravitational constant shows daily fluctuations, annual variations, correlations with Earth's position in its orbit, as if gravity breathes, pulses, and responds to the surrounding cosmic environment. What do the international metrology committees do with this inconvenient data? They calculate averages. They take all these wildly varying measurements and produce a single, clean, constant number. Then they classify all the variations as experimental errors or statistical noise. It's data manipulation on an industrial scale, sanctified by institutional consensus. Think about where Earth is right now, We're not floating in a uniform, unchanging vacuum. We're traversing the galaxy at 600,000 kilometers per hour. We pass through regions of different dark matter densities. We cross variable gravitational fields from distant stars. We're bombarded by cosmic radiation that fluctuates drastically. Our solar system travels through a galactic environment that changes over millions of years. And you want to believe that physical constants remain perfectly immutable while we surf through this turbulent cosmic ocean. The electron charge, another supposed universal constant, shows systematic drift over decades. The fine structure constant, which determines the strength of electromagnetic interactions, appears to be changing when we observe distant galaxies. But every time someone publishes this data, the reaction is always the same. There must be an error in the methodology. It needs to be recalibrated. The instruments are defective. Any explanation, except the obvious one, the constants aren't constant. Sheldrake proposed something revolutionarily simple. Instead of eternal constants, we have cosmic habits that evolve. The speed of light reached its current value over billions of years of evolution. Gravity found its current pattern through accumulated experience. These regularities are stable, but not immutable. They're deeply ingrained habits, but still capable of change. This would explain why the universe seems so finely tuned for life. Not because a cosmic designer calibrated the constants at the beginning, nor because there are infinite parallel universes with different values, but because the constants themselves evolved, adjusted, and found stable values through iterative processes over billions of years. The universe wasn't born perfect. It learned to be what it is. Imagine the implications if this is true. It would mean we might be living in a specific cosmic period where certain constants are stable, but this could change. It would mean that deep space travel could encounter regions where physics behaves differently. It would mean that the very fabric of reality is more fluid, more alive, and more responsive than we ever imagined. Why is this possibility so violently rejected? Because questioning the constancy of constants destroys the predictability that is the holy grail of physics. If the speed of light can vary, if gravity can fluctuate, if the very numerical foundations of reality are mutable, then the dream of a final theory, a definitive equation that explains everything, evaporates like morning mist. Physicists would have to accept that the universe isn't a machine running immutable software, but a living organism that evolves, learns, and responds. There's additional evidence that never reaches the public. GPS engineers need to constantly recalibrate their systems because atomic clocks drift in ways that don't exactly match relativistic predictions. Particle accelerators occasionally produce anomalous results that are quietly dismissed as statistical fluctuations. Astronomical observatories detect variations in the speed of light coming from different directions in space, but this data rarely survives the peer review process. Modern metrology has become an elaborate cover-up operation. Instead of investigating why constants vary, they spend energy creating circular definitions that make variations undetectable. Instead of exploring the implications of a universe with evolutionary parameters, they build increasingly complex mathematical models to preserve the fiction of immutability. Sheldrake doesn't ask us to abandon precision or rigor. He asks that we apply this rigor honestly, without predetermined answers. Measure the constants continuously, publish all variations, look for patterns in the fluctuations, investigate correlations with astronomical phenomena. Treat constants as open empirical questions, not as closed mathematical dogmas. Future scientific journals might publish weekly bulletins. Gravity increased by 0.3% this week. The speed of light is showing a downward trend. Electronic charge stable, but with unusual daily fluctuations. It would be real science, dealing with a real universe, instead of the Platonic fantasy of eternal laws governing a dead cosmic machine. Consciousness represents the most spectacular and humiliating failure of scientific materialism. After centuries of dissecting brains, mapping neurons, measuring synapses, and tracking neurotransmitters, science cannot answer the most basic question of all. How do specific arrangements of dead and unconscious matter generate the experience of being alive and conscious? We're not talking about technical details that remain to be filled in. We're talking about a complete explanatory void. Zero. Nothing. Materialism has no idea how you're experiencing these words right now, how you're having thoughts about them, how you're feeling anything at all. They can show correlations between brain activity and experience, but correlation isn't causation, and it certainly isn't explanation. Faced with this epistemological abyss, what does orthodox neuroscience do? It invents a story so absurd it would be comical if it weren't taken seriously. They say that when you look at a tree, you're not actually seeing the tree. What you're experiencing is a miniature reconstruction of the tree inside your brain. Your entire visual experience, this rich and vast three-dimensional world you perceive, would be compressed within a few cubic centimeters of neural tissue. It's like saying that when you watch television, the people are literally inside the device. But here's the fatal problem with this theory. If your perception is a reconstruction inside the brain, who is observing this reconstruction? Another smaller brain inside the first brain? And who observes that one? You see the absurdity? It's an infinite regression that can never explain actual conscious experience. Sheldrake proposes something radically different and infinitely more coherent. Perception works through active projection. When you observe a tree, your consciousness literally extends to where the tree is. The image exists in your mind, but it's situated in real external space, not compressed inside your skull. You're not seeing a representation of the tree, you're seeing the tree through a perceptive field that projects from your body. This might seem extraordinary, but it's exactly what you experience at every moment. When you look at the horizon, you feel your vision extending out there. When you contemplate the stars, your consciousness reaches astronomical distances, not metaphorically, literally. Your mind touches what you perceive. And here's the part that materialism desperately wants you to ignore. This is testable, measurable, verifiable. Experiments conducted for decades demonstrate that humans can detect when they're being watched, even without seeing the observer. We're not talking about marginal studies. These are research replicated at respected universities, with rigorous protocols, elaborate controls, and impeccable statistical analyses. People separated by opaque walls, by significant distances, even through closed-circuit television systems, consistently detect when someone is looking at them versus when they're not. The success rate isn't spectacular, but it's consistent and statistically significant. About 55% accuracy, where 50% would be expected by chance. Seems small? In millions of trials, this 5% difference represents a statistical impossibility if there isn't a real phenomenon occurring. Have you ever felt someone looking at you and turned to find eyes fixed in your direction? Have you ever looked at someone and the person immediately turned toward you? Materialism calls this coincidence. Billions of people regularly experience the same coincidence. But there's an elegant evolutionary explanation that scientific dogma refuses to consider. Predators and prey co-evolved for millions of years in a deadly game of mutual detection. Gazelle that could sense the gaze of a hidden leopard preferentially survived. Predators that could sense when their prey detected them hunted more efficiently. The selective pressure to develop sensitivity to directed gaze would be immense. It would be evolutionarily absurd if we hadn't developed this capacity. Ancient cultures around the world recognized the power of the gaze. The concept of the evil eye appears independently in civilizations that never had contact. Spiritual traditions have taught for millennia that vision is an active force, not passive reception. Martial arts masters train to sense the opponent's gaze without seeing. Military snipers are taught to avoid looking directly at human targets before shooting because the target might sense and move. All of this is dismissed as primitive superstition. But what if the primitives were right, and we're the ones who have been indoctrinated to ignore a natural capacity? Quantum physics offers intriguing clues about how this could work. The act of observation collapses wave functions. The observer's consciousness fundamentally affects what is observed. This isn't mysticism, it's established quantum mechanics. But when Sheldrake suggests that this principle might operate at a macroscopic scale in everyday perception, he's immediately attacked. Why? Because if consciousness can project beyond the brain, if the mind can affect matter through observation, if we're connected through perceptive fields that transcend physical space, then the entire fortress of materialism collapses. Think about the implications if this is true. Telepathy stops being impossible and becomes inevitable. If minds can touch across space when one observes the other, why couldn't they exchange information? Presentiment makes sense if consciousness isn't confined to the immediate present. Intuition about distant people becomes explainable if we're connected through fields that transcend distance. Mothers who instantly know when their children are in danger on the other side of the world. Twins who feel each other's pain. Couples who finish each other's sentences. Friends who call each other simultaneously. Materialism dismisses everything as coincidence, confirmation bias, and selective memory. But the experimental data tells another story. Studies with electroencephalograms show that one person's brain responds to another person's emotional state in another room, without any sensory communication. Remote viewing experiments conducted by the CIA and later declassified demonstrated capabilities that dramatically exceeded chance. Research on presentiment shows that the human body responds to emotional stimuli seconds before they occur randomly. Each of these studies is individually attacked, its methodologies questioned, and its researchers defamed. But collectively, they paint a consistent picture. Consciousness isn't imprisoned in the skull. It extends, projects, and connects across space and perhaps across time. The scientific community is so committed to materialist dogma that it prefers to deny overwhelming evidence rather than question its assumptions. It's easier to destroy the careers of honest researchers than to admit that the dominant worldview is fundamentally wrong. When we contemplate stars, our minds reach across light years of empty space. When we remember the past, we access information through fields that transcend neural deterioration. When we intuit the future, we detect patterns in fields that don't respect the unidirectional arrow of time. Vision isn't passive reception of photons bouncing off our retina. It's active interaction with the environment, an extension of consciousness that touches and is touched by what it perceives. This completely transforms our understanding, not just of perception, but of the very nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. Are you beginning to understand why Sheldrake was banned? He's not just questioning technical details. He's exposing that consciousness, the most intimate and immediate phenomenon of our existence, what we most fundamentally are, cannot be explained by materialism. And if materialism can't explain consciousness, it can't explain anything that really matters. We stand at the threshold of a scientific revolution that will make the transition from geocentrism to heliocentrism seem like a minor perspective correction. Each dogma that Sheldrake exposed isn't just a technical error to be corrected. It's a locked door that, when opened, reveals entire territories of investigation that were declared non-existent by ideological decree, not by empirical evidence. Observe what happens when we transform each dogma into an open question. When matter is unconscious, stops being an axiom, and becomes an investigable question, suddenly an entire universe of possibilities explodes before us. Plant consciousness is no longer hippie fantasy, but a testable hypothesis. Plants that respond to human intentions, that demonstrate memory, that communicate through underground mycorrhizal networks, all of this leaves the impossible category and enters the laboratory. Panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental property of matter like mass or charge, becomes a serious proposition that could solve the hard problem of consciousness that has tormented philosophy for centuries. When we abandon memories exist only in brains, we liberate the investigation of phenomena that millions experience but science ignores. Cellular memory in transplant recipients who acquire tastes and habits from donors, instinctive knowledge that transcends individual learning. Ancestral wisdom is encoded in morphogenetic fields accessible through altered states of consciousness, places that hold memories of traumatic or sacred events, objects that carry the energy of their previous owners. When we question only molecular medicine works, the entire spectrum of energetic healing opens for serious investigation. Acupuncture manipulates meridians that correspond to no known anatomical structure but produce measurable effects. Homeopathy works through water memory that materialism declares impossible, but experiments show alterations in crystalline structure. Shamanic healing operates through shared consciousness fields, effects of distance prayer on patients who don't know their targets of focused intention. The scientific method remains completely valid. It's its selective and biased application that constitutes the problem. We apply extreme rigor to test hypotheses within the materialist paradigm, but completely suspend this rigor when the very foundations of the paradigm need to be examined. It's like using a powerful microscope to examine details of a painting, but refusing to step back to see the complete image. Metrologists around the world absolutely refuse to investigate correlations between fluctuations in physical constants, because constants don't fluctuate by definition. It's pure epistemological circularity. We decide they're constants, so we ignore variations. Then, we use the absence of reported variations as evidence that they're constants. It's a closed loop of self-confirmation that prevents revolutionary discoveries. Imagine future scientific journals operating without these ideological shackles. Weekly bulletins reporting, gravity increased by 0.3% this week, correlated with planetary alignment. Speed of light showing 12-hour oscillation synchronized with galaxy rotation. Electronic charge in downward trend for 3 months. Possible relation to anomalous solar activity. It would be science dealing with reality as it is, not as dogma says it should be. Laboratories would investigate retrocausality without fear of professional ridicule. The future influencing the past wouldn't be heresy, but a testable hypothesis. Quantum experiments already demonstrate that future choices affect past states of particles. They would explore whether this principle operates at larger scales. They would test whether human consciousness can influence past events. They would investigate whether focused intention can alter probabilities retroactively. Universities would establish departments of fundamental consciousness, treating the mind not as an accidental byproduct of neural complexity, but as a primary aspect of reality. Physicists would collaborate with experienced meditators to explore how altered states of consciousness affect quantum measurements. Biologists would investigate how intention affects genetic expression. Doctors would study how guided visualization accelerates healing through morphogenetic fields. mental non-locality would be explored with the same rigor as quantum non-locality. If entangled particles communicate instantly across space, why couldn't entangled minds? Identical twins would be ideal subjects for experiments on non-local mental connection. Meditation groups would be laboratories for studying collective consciousness fields. The regenerated science that Sheldrake envisions doesn't abandon empirical rigor. It intensifies this rigor by applying it without predetermined biases. It tests hypotheses that materialism prohibits. It explores territories that dogma declares non-existent. It questions foundations that orthodoxy protects. Scientific revolutionaries have always done exactly this. Galileo challenged the impossible geocentric model. Darwin confronted special creation. Einstein dissolved absolute time. Planck revealed the quantum where everyone saw continuity. Each faced the same fierce resistance, the same ridicule, the same attempts at suppression that Sheldrake faces today. The difference is that now the dogmas to be broken don't come from external religious authorities. They come from the scientific system itself that has crystallized into a materialist church. Modern heretics don't deny ancient sacred scriptures. They challenge modern academic scriptures. The inquisitors don't wear cassocks. They wear white lab coats and control funding, publications, and careers. But there's a growing crack in the materialist fortress. Quantum physicists are discovering that consciousness is fundamental to wave function collapse. Neuroscientists admit they have no explanation for subjective experience. Biologists are finding communication between organisms that transcends known chemical signals. Doctors documenting cures that defy molecular explanation. Psychologists are accumulating data on psi experiences that dramatically exceed chance. Each anomaly is a wedge driving into the heart of the dominant paradigm. Each unexplained experience is evidence that the materialist map doesn't correspond to the territory of reality. Each suppressed phenomenon is a revolution waiting to happen. The universe that emerges when we dissolve these dogmas isn't chaotic or irrational. It's infinitely more interesting, more alive, and more conscious than the dead machine that materialism describes. It's a cosmos where mind and matter dance together in creative evolution, where information flows through fields that transcend space-time, where consciousness isn't a cosmic accident, but a fundamental principle woven into the very fabric of reality. This living and conscious universe isn't philosophical speculation. It's the inevitable conclusion when we follow evidence without materialist prejudices. It's what we discover when we apply the scientific method completely, without forbidden zones, without interdicted questions, without predetermined answers. The question now is, are you ready to explore this vaster universe? Are you prepared to dissolve the dogmas that limit your own consciousness? Every change begins with understanding your role as a co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. We've developed a set of audio tools to help you access this higher state of consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me."